My name is Barbara Grant, and I am with,
Jana Smith, and I'm a resilience coach.
and I'm a neurodiverse couples and individual coach. And Jana and I actually met at church, and we have become thick as thieves, fast friends, and collaborative colleagues in the work that we're both doing to bring healing and hope and strategies and understanding to so many individuals and couples who are dealing with a myriad of trauma triggers, neurodivergent profiles, all kinds of things. So, Shannon, let me let you talk a little bit about what attracted you to me and what commonalities you see in the work that we're doing before we get into our topic for today.
Yeah, after we were introduced, we set up a time to have coffee. And I think we talked for 2 or 3 hours that day because we realized very quickly that there was a lot of overlap in what we were doing working with clients, and yet some really different entry points of how we got there. So it was really exciting to realize here's somebody that I can bounce tools and share ideas and rub shoulders and iron sharpens iron with. And that's where things began.
Excellent. And you describe a little bit about too, and I'll tell a little bit more about mine. Your focus of work and how, what you focus on, how you got into it a little bit, the clients you serve and the goals that you help them achieve.
Sure. My entry point to this field of neuroplasticity and brain retraining and nervous system regulation work really started for me with chronic illness. That was the place I found myself in when I ended up needing support, and I had looked for lots of different solutions and really kind of came up empty and was getting worse over time. And I realized the root of a lot of my illness and dysregulation came from my nervous system and from kind of being chronically in dysregulated state. And so working on that helped me to rebuild. And then it gave me the foundation to begin to work on things like boundaries and other healthy relational skills that moved me in the right direction. So I went through a program and learned about nervous system regulation and worked on my own recovery, and then became a coach and started helping other people and working with groups and other coaches. And so here I am.
Excellent. Okay, great. And so to give a little background on me, I am the daughter of a woman who had autism in her family of origin. My sisters, I believe, have some. Didn't realize there was neurodiversity in my life growing up. Married a neurodivergent man, didn't realize he was neurodivergent. Had a neurodivergent son who is now an adult. Didn't realize that either until my first husband and I had separated, left the marriage, and I had remarried yet again, another neurodivergent person. And then I had my son diagnosed, which is when I really started to learn about neurodiversity, recognized it in my second marriage, and recognized the, I guess you would say, the trauma triggers that I myself had been involved with as a person, a dysregulated person, anxiously attached person, started to look at all kinds of things. Came from a biblical counseling background, moved into marriage and family therapy with a master's, and then, of course, embraced a lot of the understanding current thinking about neurodiversity and in particular how it manifests in relationships and some of the wrenches it throws in and some of the trauma triggers that people enter these relationships with and then experience even more trauma and triggering in the relationship. So when I met Jana, you and we saw this commonality and how we were both also that we're both Christians, and we both really believe that the Lord has healing for everyone on many levels. We just need to start and look at the reality where we are at and help ourselves and help others to move forward and take advantage of the tools and knowledge that is out there and apply it in specific ways to learn and grow. And I love it that you've taught me so much about the brain's ability to rewire and relearn and reprogram for the better, which is what the Bible is all full of, taking every thought captive, making it obedient to Christ. Hello, it's a manual of neuroplasticity.
It sure is. Yeah. And one of the things that sparked in our conversation when we first met each other was, as part of my journey, I became aware of the fact that I have ADHD. And so we started to see all of these overlapping layers of neurodivergence and how that's connected to nervous system dysregulation and how that affects the other people in the home. So there were a lot of light bulbs going off as we began to talk about this, and thought there's some great things that we can share as we work together. So we've learned from each other and taken each other's courses, and it's been a great year of learning for both of us.
It has been, and we're just getting started, really.
Yeah.
Okay, well then, today we wanted to do a little bit of a deeper dive because of some of the things I've learned from you about in particular, how our brains could get stuck in narratives, and how I myself, for years would be rehearsing the negative narrative of the pain in my life, whether it was from my mother, from my marriage, from my boss, whatever, and sort of rehearsing and doubling down on that narrative, and never really feeling much better because of that. And you, in some of the things you taught and shared in this Neurodiverse coaches think tank that we're all about, I'm like, oh, I have got to talk to her more about that. And so we had a session where we just went at it, and then we decided we need to put this on a recording so that we can benefit from it, and others maybe could learn some of the things we're sharing and talking about, because others are wondering all about this too. So.
Yeah. It's true. Yeah, one of the things that we have discussed and kicked around is the concept that when people have experienced trauma, oftentimes they will seek out safe connection, for that to be witnessed, for them to be seen and understood. But in the nature of it, because oftentimes the trauma is no longer happening, they can get in a cycle of repeating stories, rehashing, reliving, and then their body goes through all of the neurochemistry of the stress of what happened. So we've talked some about how if we can learn to pull back a little and slow down and ask ourselves, what am I hoping for? And is telling this story really going to accomplish what I'm hoping for? That can help us to break that cycle of reliving and swimming in trauma.
Right. Wow. And deepening the trauma connections in our brain, the hard wiring, because when it wired it together and fired together, what fires together wires together. And, so we built trauma-based, trauma-informed neural networks that are triggered so easily and are looking. And I think you described some ideas that I want you to talk about how we get familiar and apprehensive about situations, which in itself is a defensive red alert posture, which is more leaning into the fear and the limbic system of I'm in survival versus, oh, everything is fine and I can go by day and not worry about anything.
Yeah, our brain is very hardwired to protect us. One of its most important jobs is to keep us safe. And so if we've experienced recurring hurt or trauma, the brain can really get into a defensive position of trying to protect us. So it can be on alert and looking for any indication we might be in danger. And as we relive, rehearse, retell about the trauma, it deepens those grooves of concern in the brain that we don't want that to happen again. We want to make sure that we've resolved in our mind what did happen. Did I have any part to play? I don't ever want to make that mistake again or let myself be hurt like that. So as we replay that and rehearse it, we actually can create more hypervigilance in our brain toward future hurt, such that it takes less of a trigger or less of an intense situation to re-trigger all of that trauma history. So one of the things that when we find ourselves in that situation and kind of becoming more sensitive over time, one of the things that we can do is pull back and begin to speak safety to our nervous system to settle it back down so that it realizes, okay, there's not danger around every corner at every minute, even though our brain has kind of walked itself into that space.
Right. Yeah, I mean, exactly. And it is, again, the survival brain, which is so valuable. I mean, gosh, we would be all dead if we didn't have a survival brain. on overdrive and out of balance, that it's now taken over and is running the ship and the show. And, the parent brain, the prefrontal cortex, the rational brain, or the other parts of the joy center of the relational circuitry and all, it's kind of having to take backstage to that. And which is not how God intended it, actually, right? Jesus said, "Fear not, I am with you," meaning relationally, I am here, I am with you. And there's even in Philippians 4, it says, "Don't be anxious about anything, let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near." It's, we're not alone. So,
Right. And yeah, and that can feel not true when we've struggled and had hurt and trauma over and over. And so, yes, when the reactive fear-based protective part of our brain takes over, it actually shuts down the activity of all those other centers that you were talking about, the wise front control center of the brain, the joy centers, the relational centers. Those all get suppressed so that the brain can say, here's what we need to do to be safe. And so if we chronically feel unsafe, that we lose some of the access to those helpful parts of our brain. And so it requires two things. One, if we aren't safe, getting to a place of safety. And sometimes we need help and assessment and feedback about if that's true. And that's something that you help people with, is assessing, is your situation actually safe? And then once we know we are in a safe situation, then we need to start reinforcing to our brain, hey, we actually are safe. The danger's past, because it can get in a space where it feels like it's been unsafe for so long, the brain can't trust that it's okay now. And so we can begin to practice and rehearse current safety to settle that reactive fear center down so that those other parts can come online and we can access joy and relationship.
well, and as you're saying that, it occurs to me that, and I was this way myself in my unresolved issues of my neurodiverse marriage past, is that I would go to regular couples therapy, or even biblical counseling with my spouse. And I was always wanting the past to be sorted through and fixed. And I always thought that healing lay in me being able to get retribution or justification or validation or recognition for the pain I had suffered. And that he, or in my perception, he, the husband, needed to apologize, needed to acknowledge, needed to take responsibility for all that. But the truth is that the real problem of dysregulation lay in my habit of being dysregulated and my inability to self-regulate or develop the joy components in my life, the finding my joy, finding my safe people, my others, and taking personal responsibility for letting the peace of God pull me up and out of my imprisonment of fear and anxiety and anger, fight, flight, freeze, fawn, all of the things that the limbic brain is, rehearsing with us. And that's a radical thought, actually, that the healing is not in fixing the past or reliving the past or even getting apologies for the past. The healing is in, what are you doing today to calm down, and what can you do in your life to build safety and structure and an expectation of positivity and healing, where you're curious and free and you're giving yourself a green light to take personal responsibility to find your joy in life, whether it's coming from your partner or not, or whether your mother, who was PTSD like mine and never said she was sorry for anything ever, but I did come to a place of forgiveness for her, where I accepted and I made a resolution to love her well going forward, and leaning towards her and reaching out to her in friendship is with boundaries and with safety,
Yeah.
is what gave her the ability to finally respond in win-win relationship with me. So the last 15 years of her life, we became best friends.
Mm-hmm.
Even though she never said she was sorry, we never discussed all the trauma. I didn't process that with her. But we had an amazing relationship, and I'm joyful and grateful for how it ended. We ended well.
Yes. And really, it started with you regulating, with you setting boundaries, with you figuring out what you wanted and needed in that interaction and in that dynamic. And I would say an aside to this is, we want to start there. There may be situations where if the hurtful things continue to repeat and we have a hard time stopping them, then there may need to be some revisiting of like, let's apologize and own this pattern and shift it together. But a lot of times, a lot of our relationships don't require that because we aren't in the level of intimacy with that person that we would need that from them in order to be in a relationship. So either way, if we can settle ourselves down and get out of our reactive pattern, then it sort of comes out in the wash in time of what boundaries do I need to set? Where do I need to ask for forgiveness and healing around something? Where do I need to let that go and release it and not expect anything? And again, that's something that can be really helpful to have some outside input and guidance, because we get very tunnel vision when we're just an entity unto ourselves, reliving and trying to sort all by ourselves. Sometimes we need some outside perspective to say, yeah, that would be appropriate to have talked through, or you can let that go. That's not still happening anymore.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And as we're talking, it's occurring to me that even something like what's called the trauma bond, where, when somebody has been sadly victimized by a loved one who they trusted and were vulnerable with, and the loved one's agenda was not to build them up and care for them and nurture them and grow them, but to use them to keep them prisoner, keep them down, undermine them, gaslight them, control them, rebuke them, shame them, right? That over time, even if you're a healthy person, this kind of exposure to relational definition of who I am can begin to put me into that fawn mode. And you did describe, I think, a narcissist or any abusive person, relentlessly abusive behavior, whether it's intended or not, all right, evokes a fawn posture, which is as debilitating as a hyper anxiety fear or an overreactive anger fight or a paralysis freeze. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. When we're looking at the nervous system and the way that the brain responds to perceived threat, now we perceive threat, whether it's accurate or not. At times, our brain makes that judgment very quickly and automatically outside of our conscious processing. When we feel threatened, we're going to dysregulate into one of the states that our brain chooses from. So there's the typical fight or flight, which we're often familiar with, where we go into, racing heart and feeling like we need to verbally or physically respond or get out of the room because it feels overwhelming. The fawn response has come up more recently as a way to describe that fear-based protective response to feeling threatened is to make sure the other people are okay so that we can be okay. So it might be behaviors we do to prevent a conflict, things we do to kind of help and support the person if we can see they're getting upset. And this isn't just a healthy two equals supporting each other. It's one person feeling like they have to overwork and people please or be as perfect as possible and not rock the boat or prep everything just right so that they avoid conflict or upsetting the other person. And so if that becomes sort of a habitual way of interacting in a relationship, then we are living a lot of our life in fear and in response and in dysregulation. And that can have quite an effect over time and manifest as, beginning to sort of lose a sense of yourself, forgetting what you want, not asking for what you need, and just taking care of the other person, and then can eventually end up showing up as chronic symptoms or autoimmune disease or depression, mental health costs.
Or and then can go underground, turn into bitterness, vengefulness, resentment, and then come out as a lava explosion of inappropriate anger over what is seemingly not a big issue, because there's so much volatile dysregulation in the person. And then there's when you're stuck in trauma bond, if you do have anger, now you feel terribly guilty that you rocked the boat and that you overstepped your you're complicit or complacent compliant boundary, right? You
Mhm.
challenge it because there's going to be retribution for that. And it occurs to me, so anytime, Jana, what we learned about the brain is anytime you rehearse any of these extreme states, all right, whether it's to re-traumatize yourself by narrating it, telling the story, crying, feeling like a victim, believing you were a victim, without reforming the narrative to say, but God, or but I can, or wait a minute, I'm going to overcome, there's a way out. We kind of seal ourselves into the tomb of stuckness.
Mhm.
And to some extent, I mean, what is it that gets some people to see that there's a way out and some people that they just stay stuck? Have you ever thought about that?
Mhm.
Like, what is that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a few things that make the difference between being stuck and not. And I think the first is to start owning your own contribution to the dynamic. So if you're fawning to say, okay, I'm going to deal with the anxiety and discomfort of them being mad at me or them not liking it or whatever. If I'm not being mean, but I'm just choosing not to step into that people pleasing pattern, can I walk that path and start to build safety for myself around that? So being willing to step out of patterns that are perpetuating it, and then being willing to prioritize your own kind of self-care and the things that support you to be regulated and then joyful. So it's basically making yourself a priority, but in a different kind of way. It's not the selfish, it's not getting a massage and getting a pedicure and what we sometimes think as of self-care, but it's actually sort of attending to yourself. The thing that we all wish other people would do, right,
Mhm.
is to tune in and offer care and compassion. We can do that for ourselves. And there's certainly a time and a place for having your story heard or
Yeah,
for crying and grieving. But
yeah.
if we can do it within a framework of supporting the nervous system and creating safety and valuing ourselves rather than just being a miserable victim,
Yeah.
that's when we start to find our way out. Sometimes people won't succeed if they're not willing to set boundaries, if they're not willing to step out of a dysfunctional dance, if they really feel they owe somebody something. So whether it's a parent or a spouse or whatever, that or that they kind of believe that they deserve this because they're
Mhm.
contributing in an unhealthy way or whatever, then they can end up stuck. And so really, I think the critical turning point for people is whether or not they're willing to set boundaries.
I would agree with that. And it is in coaching and you and I both are coaches.
Mhm.
So when people come to us, they want sympathy, they want safety,
Yeah.
and it is on us to create that rapport, that safe place, but also to speak truth to them in love
Mhm.
and to hold out, the word of life or the good advice or the way out, but encourage them that they have to be the ones to walk the way out.
Mhm.
Nobody is going to rescue them. Nobody's going to wave a magic wand over their head and even just say a prayer of deliverance. I mean, I believe in deliverance prayers, but that alone is not going to change somebody's lifelong pattern of programming.
Mhm.
They have to take those thoughts captive. They have to want to participate and they have to realize it's going to be a climb out of the hole they're in. It's not going to be a cakewalk. And there will be natural setbacks, and especially if there's a partner or a person that's still being an assailant, a perpetrator, there's going to be resistance. It is a bit of a war. It's a struggle. And
Yeah.
it's an evolution, and like the butterfly clawing to get out of its, chrysalis cocoon in order for it to get out. And then it's the struggle of getting out, by the way, that pumps all the fluids through the butterfly's wings, expand the crumpled wings, and now it can fly.
Yeah, it's true. And it can feel like a big ask if you have felt kind of kicked down emotionally in your life to be now it's on you
Yeah.
to do the work. And yet, like you said, no one will do it for you. Getting started is hard, but as you start to feel empowered and that you do have more agency over this, there's so much freedom and life that begins to circulate through you that it begins to self perpetuate. Like once you get started, you wouldn't want to go back to that place of feeling stuck again.
Yeah.
Whether or not stay completely connected in all the relationships or you set boundaries and take some space, either way, you don't want to go back to that place of you feeling stuck. And so that helps fuel it after you get going.
Well, another thing I love about the work you do, and I've learned so much from you, and I continue to point people in your direction but I've gleaned a couple of things, and one of them is a simple thing called the butterfly hug, where you take your hands, lock the thumbs, and you place them on your chest, and you rhythmically take breaths and hug yourself and talk yourself, affirming the sorrow, but affirming the way out, and literally engage in many ways disruption to your fight, flight, freeze, fawn programming, and you're getting, your physical, your neural network, your nervous system involved. You're getting the language center involved. When you're forming words, to form words, you have to use your prefrontal cortex and your language brain. And if you're forming positive, affirming words, that alone is a pronouncement of truth over yourself. And there's all these things that you work with as a somatic body coach as well, that it's not just thinking the right thing. There's things we can do. There are levers we can pull that on a physiological level we do respond to. So talk a little bit about that dimension to your work.
Yeah, great thing to speak about today. We can really beat ourselves up because we've often tried the mental gymnastics. I'm just going to try to have a good attitude. Some of those verses you mentioned earlier, and I'm going to think about whatever's lovely and good and whatnot. But that in itself can become a performative trying really hard. The neat thing about nervous system tools is they bypass all of that effort and they just speak safety to the nervous system. So what you were showing and describing, that includes bilateral stimulation. So we're working on both sides of the brain and getting it connected. And when we do these kinds of activities and slow down and breathe, we send the signal to that automatic fear center of the brain. It's okay. You are okay. We can do this. It's going to be okay. Even if there's hard things, even if there's hurtful things, there's some level of safety that we can cultivate by practicing exercises that speak to that part of our brain.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing I love about the work you and I both do is that we love doing group work. Mm-hmm. And we love to see the people in our groups collectively having a unified, validating experience of everyone's dealing with the stuff, everyone's learning from each other. No one is better or worse. No one's wrong. Everyone has opportunity. We're all exploring. And it's such a sort of a multiplication of positive energy is really, and it's so relational. And it brings us out of our just little entombed self of worry and fear and habit, and helps us to consider the bigger picture, the bigger landscape, where we're not alone anymore in that. And when we have that, so talk about how that, because I know you do group work, and I was in one of your groups, you've been in one of mine, and we know the value of that.
Yeah. Well, when the brain is stuck in fear or a trauma loop, the narrative that it has is it's not safe, it's never going to be safe, and I'm alone. So when we begin to engage with other people and start forming some safe attachments, that helps those relational circuits of the brain to balance out the fear center and say, actually, there's another narrative and I'm not alone. And, if people have grown up in the church and experienced trauma and not been supported in the way that they needed in that, whether it was invalidated or they were just told, given verses to have faith or think positive or whatnot, if that kind of added another layer to their suffering, sometimes they will struggle to first create that safe attachment with God. And so that's where some tools that create safety in the body and then connecting safely with other people can create that foundation and begin to open the door to, and now I can transfer that to believing God really is safe. God is for me. He loves me. And so there can be different ways to get there. Sometimes we start there. Sometimes we can't get there at first. But the group dynamic does a lot for our nervous system and our sense of safety and taking us out of that narrative of I'm alone.
Yeah. No, it's so important. In fact, just before we recorded this, I was on a session with a neurodivergent young man, autism, ADHD. And he's spent his whole life in solitude and frustration. and didn't even know until recently, and he's, not a kid anymore, that he was autistic. And now he has this framework to begin to understand his whole, skill set and developmental challenges of what he hasn't yet figured out and why he takes things the way he does. And he suffers in particular from what we call rejection sensitive dysphoria, which as I'm learning about this and understanding neuroplasticity, is a sort of heightened hypersensitivity to rejection. But given the fact that young neurodivergent children are often unaware of the group social signals going on, the vibe, the subtle, social behavioral communications, the facial, emotive stuff. And they are aware of what they're doing right and what they're doing wrong, and whether they're being comforted, or if they're super sensitive, they're harder to comfort because hugging a baby that's sensitive might actually drive them nuts. Colicky children, that could be it. So I talked to him about how, his brain did not necessarily have some of the mitigating influences or data receptivity that would have mitigated his heightened fear of rejection. And in his limbic brain of fear, he was rehearsing that and writing rules for that. And his pattern brain, which we all have pattern brains looking for patterns and wiring, locked onto that and said, yep, I'm rejectable. I'm going to be rejected. Pretty much everything that happens to me is a rejection. And so he's got this very big case of RSD, rejection sensitive dysphoria. And when I talked to him today about neuroplasticity, he looked at me like, oh my goodness, I had no idea that this was even a possibility. And you're giving him like the Rosetta Stone for decoding all the misunderstanding or misinterpreted thinking he's had. And then I even said to him, would you even consider, I said, have you ever gone online to look for chat rooms or Quora or Reddit discussion threads or Facebook or any place where neurodivergent people gather and share what they're learning and what they're struggling with? And he's like, that exists? And I'm like, yes, it exists. There are communities. You don't have to participate. You just can be a fly on the wall. You just be an observer, but these people are all dealing exactly with what you're dealing with. They've different stages of progression, of overcoming, of, evolution. And he just was like, I had no idea. I never thought about that he's been so not in community. And so because like here you and I are in totally different locations talking through Zoom and delivering this obviously through digital platforms to many people who are going to be all over the world hearing us talk about this, right? So the idea of community is so there's so many opportunities now for people to connect and learn and share, and it be safe, and they can shut it down if they don't want to be on. They don't have to talk if they don't want to. They don't have to type in and write, they can have a avatar and not even be themselves. So, I mean, is that something what do you think about that?
Yeah, I completely agree. And, before I respond to what you said, what you described with this young man is his brain was doing its own internal confirmation bias. Because what happens when we feel under threat or rejection or afraid of being alone is our brain will look for all the evidence to support that narrative. So unless we question that narrative, we will become more stuck or more sensitive over time. So that circles back to what we were saying at the beginning about when we rehearse things. We don't even have to rehearse them out loud. We can just look for all the evidence that it's true. If it goes unchecked, it becomes more and more true over time. So yes, one of the antidotes to all of that is to get connected with other people, and not just other people who will wallow with us, right? Not people who will say, yeah, that's terrible, and me too. We want people who are moving in a growth direction, who are saying, yes, there's hard things in life, but I want to balance that with chasing joy. Yes, you might have had a rough week, and maybe you can mention it for 20 seconds, but let's not spend an hour picking it apart and analyzing it and reliving it. So when we're looking at connecting with people, if it's outside of our window of tolerance to be part of a real group in person or live or over the internet, we may want to do what you're talking about, where we're a fly on the wall and look for discussions that are people wanting to grow, that are self-reflective and aren't just complaining. And if we're not even ready for that, we can start with recordings that help soothe and comfort our nervous system. So I have some of those that you can see for free on my website, and they just help walk your brain into a space of safety, with, helping you to get in touch with the current moment and your senses and positive experiences in nature that help your brain to go, okay, it's safe. And that can walk us toward feeling safe, then beginning to connect with other people.
Wow. Well, that is huge. That's such a big part of the strategy that I encourage my clients towards as well. So it's always so refreshing that, when I've found some things that God has shown me over my life and different groups I've been in and different growth opportunities and forums, and then to hear somebody like you, we're recent friends, they're like, yeah, this is how it works. I'm like, okay, there's a brain reason for that too. Like there's science for a while.
Yes.
Have coffee with a good friend, or
There's a reason it works, and we can talk about, the more we understand about the brain, we can talk about why it works, but sometimes we don't need to know why. We just need to know it works, and then we do it, right?
Well, and I think what you're saying too about finding people who are overcoming and not wallowing in pain and misery, because unfortunately, a huge amount of what's available in terms of digital community and discussion is extremely negative. It's, oh, you think that's bad. Let me one up you and, take it 3 notches higher or lower in how miserable I can be. And I actually strictly forbid that kind of thing in the groups I host. I'm like, we are not here to bash anyone. We are not here to trash anyone, including ourselves. In fact, when I play when I play tennis with people, I said this to my friend that plays tennis with me. She hit a ball. It was a bad hit, but we all make mistakes, right? And she went off to pick a ball in the corner and starts mumbling to herself. And I shouted after her, you better be saying nice things to yourself right now. Don't be beating up my partner, and she laughed. She laughed because I call my tennis buddies out on it. Like, I don't want to hear you bad mouthing yourself on the court. I don't want to listen to that. I don't want you to do that. I wouldn't let anybody talk to you that way. I don't want you talking to you that way. And it's a joke, but I'm actually pretty clear that that is an important aspect of what lifts us up, and even being able to laugh about it is ideal.
Yeah, sometimes we need clarity and validation that what we're dealing with is real or is dysfunctional or is hurtful.
Yes.
But then we don't want to stick around and have catastrophizing and fear mongering be the next step. And so, my encouragement to people is get clear about what's going on and what's healthy and what's not, and really start with yourself, but don't immerse yourself in a community that's going to perpetuate the narratives of doom.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there's lots of hope. We don't need to spend our energy there.
No, and once we get the hang of being hopeful for ourselves, I can't tell you how many people, first of all, have inspired me, that decided to pull up their pants and go, okay, this, I'm not going to minimize the pain I'm in, but I am going to maximize my opportunity to heal and find a way to walk with this in dignity and faith, in hope, and some be a blessing and be blessed by others. And that has always been like, wow, I didn't know how to do that growing up because I didn't have a family that did that. We all went into our corners and licked our wounds and came out fawning, so that we wouldn't get beaten up and shamed and blamed anymore. And it came late to me in my life. And certainly, the discovery that if anyone has any kind of a faith model that they walk in, that is in itself a place of lifting you up and above to a bigger reality, out of your place of your tomb or your grave or your dead end, and putting you on a road to something else, the next thing that whatever that is. All faith models actually do that. Which is why I think it's an important expression of the human spirit and heart, that's a God-given dimension to ourselves that we share usually in community with others. And that's a very hopeful thing. So,
yeah. And a lot of that begins with believing and accepting that we have value.
Yeah.
right? That God loves us unconditionally. It's not earned and all of that. And when we can start from that place, we can begin to believe that it's appropriate to set boundaries, or it's appropriate to attend to what's going on inside because we matter. So we're worth it.
And I like too that, you know, that's where compassion actually starts, is first for yourself. You know,
Mhm.
if you can't be gentle with yourself and kind to yourself, and you're just going to keep beating yourself up and replaying the shame and blame tape, or the rejection, doubling down on that or whatever, then you're really not going to be able to be kind and accepting and gracious and compassionate for anyone else,
You
because
can't
you
give what you don't have. Yeah.
So I think when Jesus said, love others as you love yourself, he doesn't mean like, oh, me, and more me. He's like, I'm going to be kind to myself and gracious to myself and forgiving and understanding. And I'm going to offer that to others too, because, you know, we're all struggling to move upward in this, you know, place of challenge that we call life, right?
Amen. Yeah.
Oh, well, so, you know, if you and I had one thing to leave to our particular populations that we're working with. So if you were speaking to your your neuro overcomers or whatever, your resilience clientele, you know, what would you want to leave them with from this discussion?
Yeah. If you are chronically stressed, if you feel like you are not able to access joy, or you're not able to calm down and you don't know how to rest in a restorative way, if you're living under a lot of pressure and fear, or if you feel numb, you can't feel your feelings, then there's a lot of hope for you. And that's not a place where you want to stay. So I would encourage you to explore ways out of that. I have a framework. There's a lot out there. I'm not the only person out there offering this, but I have a really simple framework that I teach people that help them to begin to climb out of that place of chronic stress or trauma on repeat. And whether it's showing up as emotional volatility or chronic health symptoms, there's a lot that you can do for yourself to empower yourself to get unstuck. And so I love just to be able to come alongside people and watch them transform. It's a very joyous journey, even though
Oh,
it's not easy. So yeah, so that's what I would encourage you. You're not stuck. There is hope. And I know your message, Barbara, is of hope as well.
yes, it is. So, if I were to offer, you know, my clients something, and I do offer it under the banner of hope and healing, you know, restoring hope and healing, is that both neurodivergent and neurotypical people, especially when they're in some form of partnership or relationship, can be re-wounding each other on a lot of levels. And, you know, there's this thing called the Cassandra syndrome, which many of the neurotypicals who are married to neurodivergent people have flown that banner of being misunderstood and lonely and deprived of affection and all kinds of things. But what I really want to say is that the neurodivergent people also are feeling very triggered, very traumatized, very misunderstood, very isolated, and don't have the relational lassos that they can throw up against something and pull themselves out of necessarily. They're much more likely to stay isolated and you know, stuck. So I would ask and invite my groups, my people, to open their aperture about this dynamic for themselves first, and to be realistic about where they're at, what's going on, and what they desire, and then be curious about anyone and everyone in their life, especially their partner, about what they're struggling with and how they can stop being part of the problem for them and at least get into their own lane and begin going forward with whatever lever they can pull to do that, whether it's butterfly hugs, somatic exercises, meditative stuff, or affirming scripture, or just having a great talk with somebody, not for the purpose of wallowing in pain, but for sharing and lifting each other higher. That is the path to healing that has always been available. And we happen to be in these arenas of, you know, neuroplasticity, neurodiversity, resilience, you know, all of that. But it's basically just science catching up with what has been true all along in the world of human experience. And now we have new fancy names and, papers written about it that we can document things. So tell us how people will find you. We'll have this all in wherever we are posting this, whether it's your website, my website, whatever, but I want to make sure they hear it from you too.
Sure. My website is Jana M. Smith, so JANAM Smith.com. And really, that's the great place to go to see all of my resources. I also have a YouTube channel, but you can get to it from my website. So it's easier just to give you the one place to go. And you can find some free tools and watch other videos that I've made explaining things if you're curious to learn more and hear about it. And I also offer a free discovery call if anybody who wants to chat with me and find out if what I'm doing might be a good fit for their situation. So you're welcome to reach out.
Excellent. And like you, I also offer a free Hope and Healing call, where there's so many points of entry to healing. And I love being able to talk to people about what is their situation, what their needs are, what is their budget and time, and all of that. And then point them either at resources I have on my website or in my archives, or towards colleagues like you, because I'm not the best fit for everyone and the best starting point for them. So, and my website is www.bg-hc.com, which is short for Barbara Grant, Hope for Couples. So bg-hc.com. And well, yeah, it has always been so much fun talking with you. I'm sure we will do many more of these about
Yes.
all kinds of things. But,
Yes.
thank you so much. And yeah, we'll see you soon, I'm sure.
Thank you so much, Barbara. This was a lot of fun.
All right. God bless. Bye.